The year was 1872. The West was still wild, untamed, lawless, and hungry. The Civil War had ended less than a decade before, and America was rebuilding itself on ambition and greed. The railroad stretched across the land like a steel vein, pumping men and money into places that maps still called unknown territory. Gold had been found, silver too, but the rumors whispered in saloons from Denver to San Francisco spoke of something far greater, a discovery that would make gold look cheap and kings look poor. They called it the Diamond Field. It began with a man walking into a San Francisco bank, dusty boots, a tattered coat, and a leather pouch. Inside that pouch were diamonds, real diamonds, rough, uncut, and glimmering in the gaslight like frozen stars. The man's name was Philip Arnold, and that pouch, small enough to fit in your hand, would soon ignite one of the greatest frenzies in American financial history. A frenzy built not on facts but on faith in greed. Within weeks, the whispers became headlines. Investors, bankers, and politicians, men who built railroads in ruled cities, began to believe that somewhere out in the barren desert, hidden from the world, lay an endless field of gems. Not just diamonds, but rubies, emeralds, sapphires, enough to rewrite the global market. And like moths to flame, they came running. By the time anyone realized it was all a lie, the money was gone, reputations were ruined, and the so-called Diamond Kings had vanished into legend. But this isn't just a story about fraud. It's a story about human nature, about how easily the line between ambition and delusion can blur when fortune is close enough to touch. It's about how two ordinary men, uneducated miners with dirt under their nails, outsmarted the sharpest minds in America. In the 19th century, you could fool a man with a gun, but it took genius to fool a banker. And that's exactly what Philip Arnold and John Slack did. Their hoax became so perfect, so believable, that even Tiffany & Company, the most prestigious jeweler in New York, confirmed the gems were real. The newspapers called it the most extraordinary discovery since gold was found at Sutter's Mill. But beneath the excitement, beneath the champagne toasts and the glowing editorials, something darker was brewing. The Diamond Field was a mirage, and like every mirage in the desert, it vanished the moment men got too close. By the end of this story, millions of dollars would disappear, reputations would burn, and the myth of the West, that you could strike it rich if you just believed hard enough, would never look the same again. So, let's go back to the smoke-choked streets of San Francisco, to the saloons filled with lies, and to two men who realized something profound, that in America, the dream of wealth was the easiest thing in the world to sell.
They weren't geniuses. They weren't gentlemen. Philip Arnold and John Slack were just miners, the kind of men who had spent too many years chasing other people's gold. Arnold was short, wiry, with eyes that never seemed to rest. Born in Kentucky, he had a talent for two things: digging and lying. He'd worked for mining companies, hauled stones in the Nevada dust, and even done a little prospecting on his own. But what he lacked in luck, he made up for in patience. John Slack, his partner, was quieter, the type who spoke only when there was something worth saying. Together, they'd spent months traveling through the barren lands of the West, searching for a fortune that never came. And then one night, over a cheap bottle of whiskey in a tent battered by desert wind, Arnold said something that changed everything. "What if we don't find a diamond field?" he said. "What if we make one?" Slack didn't laugh. He just looked at Arnold across the flickering lantern light and after a long pause, nodded. They knew the fever of the time. America was drunk on discovery, oil, silver, gold. Men sold their souls on rumors. The richer the story, the faster it spread. And diamonds? Diamonds were the holy grail. Arnold had an advantage. He'd worked briefly for the San Francisco branch of a diamond drill company, where he learned enough about gemstones to sound like an expert to men who weren't. He also knew how the city's financiers thought: greedy, proud, and terrified of missing the next big strike. Their plan was simple, at least on paper. Step 1, acquire real gems. Step 2, plant them in the wilderness. Step 3, let greed do the rest. Arnold took what little money they had and went east, where he purchased small bags of low-grade uncut stones from dealers in London and Amsterdam. They weren't worthless, just unimpressive. To a trained gemologist, they'd raise questions, but to a rich man with stars in his eyes, they'd look like the crown jewels. When he returned to the West, the game began. In a dusty corner of San Francisco, Arnold strolled into the office of George D. Roberts, a banker and investor, carrying a small leather pouch. He didn't try to sell anything. He simply asked for a safe place to store it until he could find the right people to talk to. Curiosity did the rest. Roberts peeked inside, and what he saw nearly stopped his heart. Raw diamonds, rubies, and sapphires, dozens of them. Arnold said little. He didn't brag, didn't boast. He just shrugged. Found them out in the territory. Ain't worth much till someone figures where the rest are. It was a masterstroke. The less he said, the more Roberts wanted to know. Within hours, whispers filled the gentlemen's clubs of San Francisco. The next gold rush had begun, this time not in the dirt, but in the minds of men. Among those who heard the story was Asbury Harpending, one of the city's richest and most ambitious speculators, a man who had once tried to start his own country. When he heard about Arnold's diamonds, he laughed at first. Then, like every man who thinks he's smarter than the rest, he decided to check for himself. Arnold played the part of the reluctant discoverer perfectly. He insisted he didn't want fame, didn't want partners. He just wanted fair compensation for his trouble. Every gesture, every pause, every look, it all sold the illusion of a man guarding a secret too valuable for words. Harpending offered to buy in. Arnold refused. Offered more. Arnold still refused. By the time he finally agreed to a meeting, Harpending was desperate. And that was exactly what Arnold wanted. In the following days, Harpending examined the stones with the jeweler, and they were, in fact, genuine. Not perfect, not flawless, but undeniably real. And that was enough. Men who had built empires on speculation suddenly became believers. They didn't care how Arnold had found them, only that he had. They called it the discovery of a lifetime, a secret diamond field, somewhere in the wilderness, vast beyond comprehension. And Arnold and Slack just watched as the story grew legs and ran faster than they ever could. From San Francisco to Washington, men were already calculating how much the field might be worth. Some claimed it would double the nation's wealth. Others said it would destroy the diamond trade entirely. And in a smoky saloon one night, Arnold leaned back in his chair, whiskey in hand, and said quietly to Slack, "They think they're buying diamonds, John, but all they're really buying is a story."
The fever was everywhere now. It wasn't just investors whispering in marble offices or behind mahogany doors anymore. It was the mailroom clerks, the taxi drivers, even the bartenders in downtown Manhattan. Everyone wanted a piece of Auric Ventures. The name Jonathan Hale had become synonymous with gold itself. People said he could find veins where the earth was dry. Newspapers ran stories calling him the alchemist of Wall Street. Others called him the prophet of prosperity. But behind that image, Hale's empire was crumbling. He sat one evening in his office, staring at the fire in the small iron hearth near his desk. The glow of the flames danced across the room, lighting up the charts and geological reports pinned to the wall. All forged, all fake. The heat made the ink curl slightly at the edges. Outside, a storm brewed over the Hudson. The city lights flickered like dying embers. Hale could hear the distant rumble of thunder, and for the first time, he wondered if it was coming for him. A week later, he was in Nevada, again, at the so-called Golden Field. Dozens of men worked under floodlights, their boots sinking into the muddy ground. Trucks roared, drills screamed, and above it all, Hale's partner, Eddie Matson, barked orders like a war general. But the deeper they dug, the clearer the truth became. There was no gold, only wet soil, fool's gold, and the broken dreams of 1,000 investors. "John," Matson muttered one night by the campfire, tossing a gold nugget between his fingers, "they'll come for us soon, you know that, right?" Hale didn't answer. He just stared into the flames. He thought about the investors, the press, the politicians who'd shaken his hand and called him a genius. He thought about his wife, Elizabeth, who had stopped answering his calls. He thought about running. But greed is a strange thing. It doesn't let go easily. When Hale returned to New York, he didn't shut the company down, he doubled the promise. He told the press the mine was expanding, that new veins had been discovered just deeper below. He printed new brochures, hired new spokesmen, and told Mason to buy more time. And Mason did. They staged photographs, piles of gold bars that were actually tungsten cores wrapped in thin golden foil. They bribed journalists to visit a fake site, staged with imported African sand to match the ore composition. And when the money started flowing again, Hale told himself it wasn't a lie, it was just a delay. A bridge between dreams and reality. The fever reached its peak in 1987. That year, Auric Ventures announced the largest private gold discovery in American history. Investors poured in millions. TV anchors called it the modern-day California rush. But while the world celebrated, Hale barely slept. He was haunted by the sound of drills, of Mason's voice, of the hollow clang of metal hitting dirt. He started hearing things. Sometimes when he walked past the vault in the basement, he swore he heard whispering, like the ghosts of those who trusted him. "Where is our gold, Jonathan?" The line between genius and con man blurred completely. And as the rain battered the glass of his penthouse window one night, Hale finally said the words he'd avoided for years. "It's gone. There was never any gold." But it was too late. The fever had already infected the world.
The first cracks didn't come from the government. They came from within. An accountant, just 26, fresh out of NYU, was reviewing invoices when she noticed something odd. A transfer from a non-existent supplier in Utah. Dates that didn't match. Figures that rounded too neatly. She sent an email to compliance, then another, then another. By the time Jonathan Hale noticed, the SEC was already watching. It started quietly. A phone call here, a request for clarification there. Nothing threatening, not yet. But Hale knew what it meant. He'd been in finance too long not to see the storm gathering. He stopped sleeping. The penthouse that once felt like a fortress now seemed like a cell. Stacks of falsified documents covered his desk, and Mason's voice on the phone grew more erratic every day. "John, listen," Mason said one night, voice trembling. "We can fix this. We always fix it. We'll bury the files, burn what's left, start fresh." Hale stared at the whiskey in his glass. His hand didn't shake, but his eyes, they were empty. "Eddie," he said quietly, "there's no gold. There never was. You can't fix what was never real." The line went dead. A week later, the raids began. FBI agents in Navy jackets flooded the offices of Auric Ventures. Computers seized, safes opened, walls stripped bare. By noon, the news was everywhere. The Great Gold Hoax, America's largest financial lie. Photos of Hale being led in handcuffs down the marble steps of his building circled the world in hours. Outside, rain poured down, the same storm that had haunted him since Nevada. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the crowd, Mason disappeared. The trial was brutal. Federal court, downtown Manhattan. Dozens of witnesses, investors crying on the stand. The prosecution played audio of Hale promising unimaginable returns, his voice calm, confident, hypnotic. The defense tried to paint him as a visionary gone too far, a man blinded by ambition, not greed. But the jury didn't buy it. On the 34th day of the trial, Jonathan Hale was found guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, and wire deception. Sentence: 150 years. When the verdict was read, Hale didn't react. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes fixed on the scales of justice behind the judge's bench, the same ones he'd once used in his company logo. They were perfectly still. In prison, time lost meaning. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Hale's fame vanished, but the legend didn't. People whispered that some of the gold had existed, hidden somewhere in the Nevada desert. Others said Mason fled the country, taking millions with him. Hale never confirmed or denied any of it. He just stared out of his narrow cell window, where the sunlight hit the bars like golden veins in stone. "Funny thing about gold," he once told a reporter years later, "it's not the metal people want. It's the illusion, the dream that something pure still exists in the dirt." He died 10 years later, alone in his sleep. The world barely noticed, but out there, in that barren stretch of Nevada, where the wind still howls through the empty pits of his fake mind, a single wooden sign remains, weathered, cracked, half buried in dust. It reads faintly, "Auric Ventures, established 1982. And when the desert sun sets, some say you can still see a glint of something gold beneath the sand. Not real gold, just the reflection of a man's greatest lie.